Well, hi, hello, how are you, everyone? Welcome to today's exciting episode of Flashback with Wes Britton, where you get to hear me and my co-host, Karina Kansas, interview stars, entertainment insiders, and entertainers from every variety from times past, present, and future. So kick back, enjoy this next hour, and thanks for stopping by. Well, hi, hello, how are you, everyone? Wes Britton here, welcoming all men and women and boys and girls and all the ships at sea to today's especially special edition of Flashback. Today is our Lost in Space tribute, which is going to involve June Lockhart and Bill Mumy and Mark Goddard. And for today's special Lost in Space episode, we're dedicating it to actor teacher Mark Goddard. And that's because he left us on October the 10th at the age of 87. And you may have seen his obits out there that Bill Mumy has been putting up about his friend. So I hope you enjoyed today's interview because, among other things, you'll find out how you can get his book, To Space and Back. But anyway, I could keep rambling, and that's not why you're here. You're ready to hear June Lockhart, Bill Mumy, and Mark Goddard on this extraordinarily special edition of Flashback.
A long time ago, one of our first guests was John Provost, who, of course, played Timmy on Lassie, and he came on the show to talk about his book, Timmy's in the Well, which is an ideal title for a book, you'd think. And then you have Lost in Space, and on DWP we've had on Mark Goddard, and a number of times we've had on fellow KSAV host Bill Mumy to talk about his various music productions. What do they have in common? Well, Mom, because they both could call our next guest June Lockhart Mom, because she was Mom on both Lassie and Lost in Space. She also spent 2 years on Petticoat Junction. She's won a Tony. She's won an Emmy. We're definitely going to have to talk about her connections to NASA here in a bit, because one of her favorite awards happened last October, recognition for her service to, we'll talk about that. Goodness, I'm not sure where to talk about, because she's got 80 years as a showbiz professional. In fact, back in 1938, I think was her first film, where she starred with her parents in one of the many editions of A Christmas Carol.
And if I may interrupt, I made my debut at the Metropolitan Opera House in 1933 when I was 8. So that was my first paid performance, and it was in the first English sung opera. We opened the season that year. I'd been studying ballet at the Metropolitan, and I was chosen to be in the opera. So it was in a pantomime scene. So I've been at this, as you say, 80 years, with no end in sight.
Excellent. Yeah, I was about to say, you've got projects going on and been on television, all the way through. Well, let's start at the beginning, because you came from an entertainment family to begin with, right?
Yes, my father and mother were both actors, and you probably would, your audience might know my father as the judge in Miracle on 34th Street. That usually pegs it. And also, the first film that I did was Dickens' Christmas Carol, which airs every year on Turner Classic Movies. And that's my mother playing Mrs. Cratchit. My father was Bob Cratchit, and I played Belinda. And it's such fun to see it every year. It's really just delightful. That's a treat.
Okay, so you said you started out in film, I guess, 1938 with your parents, and you've been acting ever since.
And then after that, the next film I did was was All This in Heaven 2 with Betty Davis, and a lovely show. Then after that, I did Sergeant York, in which I played Gary Cooper's sister.
You mentioned Sergeant York and A Christmas Carol. What were some of the other films that you worked on during, the period before TV came along?
Well, I did, as I say, I was in school, but then once I graduated, then I went under contract to MGM, and I did Son of Lassie, and I did that was my first experience with working with the dog, which apparently paid off much later, because when I was up for the Lassie mother, Rudd Weatherwax, the owner and trainer of the dog, said, "Oh, well, if you can get June, that's fine. She knows how to work with the dog." But in the meantime, I did a lot of live TV starting in 1949, and it was the Ford Fireside Theater, and I did one of the my great joys during that time was to be doing a White House, a current events news quiz show with the White House correspondents. And every Monday night they would fly up from Washington, and we would do this show first for NBC and then for ABC, and it was based on current news. And as a result of that, I was able to go to my first White House press conference, an Eisenhower conference, and had made some fast friends at the White House, and still can go to press conferences when I'm in Washington.
Yeah, it seems like after you did a lot of stage and movie screens, you did a lot of work in, TV westerns, right?
Oh, yes, so I enjoyed that. I love westerns. I love the period, the costumes. And, yes, one of my favorites was Have Gun Will Travel, in which I played a lady doctor. I did 2 of those shows. And, there's an interesting story. In one of them, in the second episode that I did, I was supposed to have a rather sweet, kind of implied romantic love scene with Richard Boone. And as the sun was setting and the 2 of us were sitting there out in the Simi Valley, which is where we shot all those shows, and we did so we got ready to play the scene at the end of the day, and I went in, got in position by the camera, and I said, "Where's Dick?" And they said, "He's gone home." I said, "What?" And we're going to play this romantic love scene here, and he's left, he's gone home. And they said, "Well, you're going to do it with the script girl." I said, "Well, all right." So I played this scene, which you can see on screen, and then the next morning, he came in, and when the sun was setting at the end of the day, he played his part with the script girl. And they cut it together, and it looked as though we were both sitting there looking at each other, playing this rather tender scene.
Yeah, that's going to be tough to do when you don't have the leading man to gaze into his eyes.
Right.
And all of that.
That's right. But I played it just as though he was there.
Well,
it's very interesting.
It takes us to Lassie, and you were actually, the 3rd actress to play Timmy's mom, right?
Yes, my dear friend Jan Clayton created the role. I was living in New York at the time, and when Jan wanted to leave, they offered it to me, and I turned it down because I was living there and married and had a couple of children. And then Cloris Leachman played it for a while, one season, and then she was leaving. They offered it to me again, and I turned it down. And then I moved back out here to California, and one day on the street, I ran into the producers, who said, "We wish you'd do the Mother and Lassie for us." And I said, "Well, I'll do it a year." And they said, "That's not long enough." So on my way home, I thought, that would be a very good show to do. And this is the 3rd time it's been offered to me now. So I had my agent call. I tested for it and was approved by the Campbell Soup Company because, of course, they had to make sure that nobody had any communist tendencies in those days. It was in 1957, with all the McCarthy hearings going on. And so that started it, and I did it for 6 years. I did it until they changed the format and gave the dog to a forest ranger.
Yeah, I remember when that happened. Was it difficult to pick up a role that other people had played, or was it
absolutely.
a generic role that made no sense?
No, not at all. Not at all. Because you play the situation, you play the scenes, and there was just no... and the same with when I joined Petticoat Junction. The first day of work, I went in and I just said, "Good morning, everybody," and we were off and running, you know.
Well, I got to ask this since I had the opportunity to talk with John Provost. I met him as an adult, and he's a delightful gentleman. What was he like as a kid? Was he fun to have around as your stage kid?
Yes. Well, he was worked so hard. I really, if you've read that book, you know what his mother put him through. And but he knew his lines, and we had a wonderful man who used to rehearse us before we would get in the scene. His name was Lloyd Nelson. And a script supervisor, you know. And then and of course he had to go to school. And I must say that Bonita Granville, who was the producer, was very concerned about his not falling behind in reading or anything. And so they arranged for him to go to early morning classes at UCLA in a special school there, in which he could have sort of special reading classes, and then come to the set, and then work a full day, and then go on home. So, I mean, he really worked like a grown-up man all day. It was just very dear, and I think we got on very, very well, and there was an affection between us, which exists to this day.
Oh, yeah, I got the impression that he thought, I guess everybody on the set. How many dogs did you work with? It wasn't just one, Lassie, was there?
Oh, well, during the 6 years that I did the show, there were 4 main Lassies. And then they weren't all of the same parent dogs either. Because sometimes the Humane Association or the let's see, what is it? Not SPCA. The well, you know what I mean. Anyway, and they would call and talk to Rudd and say, "We've just had a collie brought in, turned in, who looks remarkably like Lassie. Do you want to take a look at it?" So he would go down, and then pretty soon he'd come back to the set, when on the leash would be this additional beautiful collie dog, and they'd train it, and it would be used for the stunt, which would be the running or the pretend dog fights. I can tell you about dog fights. That would be interesting. They would bring in this beautiful German Shepherd, spray it with a little black hairspray, and put a rubber band around its upper lip to expose the canines. And then one trainer would hold that dog, and one trainer would hold Lassie. And then they would say, "Go on, sick him, sick him." And the 2 dogs would run together and romp and play and roll over and have the best time, because they had been raised together to do this, to play in this way. And then when the director got his shot, he would yell, "Cut," and both dogs would sit down waiting for their treat, because they had romped and played. And then the sound man would lay in a recording of the damnedest dog fight you had ever heard, with snarling and biting and everything. And of course, really, what had gone on was just the 2 dogs had been romping and playing. And we would all gather around to watch, because it was the only time in which the dogs were apparently able to be sort of undisciplined on the set. It was a hoot.
Yeah, that sounds like that'd be great entertainment, especially if you love dogs.
Yeah.
So how did you transfer over to going on the Jupiter?
I had done an episode of Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea with for Irwin Allen, and the next day he came down. He said, "I'm doing a new series. Do you want to do another series?" And I said, "Yes, I do." Gave me the script. He said, "Let me know what you think of it." And the next morning I said, "I think it's marvelous. I'd love to do it." So I was the first one hired for Lost in Space.
Well, realizing you'd be with Zorro and our friend Bill Mumy.
Yes, I had never met Guy Williams before, but he was a wonderful man, a perfect choice for that part, really. Yeah. Very kindly, very generous, and we all adored working with him. He was just a grand man, just perfect for the role, I thought.
Oh, I thought everybody in that cast was. I forgot who played the evil Dr. Smith, but I gather...
well, his name was Jonathan Harris.
Yeah, Jonathan Harris. He was a great friend to Bill.
Uh-huh, yes, he was, but I'm sure even Billy would tell you that he was exactly the same on as off. He had a sly sense of humor and could be rather devious when necessary. But we all enjoyed him. We had his number.
Well, I'm sure there's going to be lots of stories about Lost in Space, but sadly we got time constraints on these radio interviews, so I want to make sure that we get in some other aspects of your career. Lost in Space was on for a couple of seasons, and then off you are on yet another series. How did you move over to Petticoat Junction?
Well, I had known the producer, and when Petticoat Junction, when Space ended, I dropped him a note and said I was now out of the Silver Lame, and if he was going to create a new series, I'd love to be considered for it. And I probably was the only person in town who didn't know that B. Benaderet was not well. And anyway, so he called me and said, "Can you drop by the office today?" So I did. And he said that he had created this part of the lady doctor in Petticoat Junction and wondered if I'd like to do it. And then he said that B was not coming back. And I was stunned because I really had no idea. And so that was it. In the meantime, between the time I was set to start, she had died. And so, as I said, I was signed for it, went on the set and just said, "Good morning, everybody," and off we went. And I was the new lady on the show. But they were wonderful. And that was such fun to do because I've always loved comedy. And my first Broadway show was a comedy. And I knew how to play with all those marvelous actors. And the scripts were so funny. And it was really character comedy. And that's what I really enjoyed. And so we did 2 or 3 years with that.
Well, I do have one question about being a TV mom. How would you compare John and Bill in their roles and as youngsters?
Well, they both worked very hard, and they both had to go to school all the time, you know, so that every time we finished a shot, they would go and get their 20 minutes of schooling. Is done in 20-minute intervals if they're shooting. If they're not working that day on the set, then they can have their proper 3 hours of schooling, and but otherwise they're supposed to have 3 hours of schooling in 20-minute intervals and an hour for lunch.
When was it that you got interested in aviation? Because I gather that was part of your life.
Oh, well, I have always been involved in aviation and the wonderment of science. In the mid-40s, I had the opportunity to work with Western Airlines, and I was Miss Western Airlines, which was wonderful. And we opened up routes all the way up to Anchorage, and that includes Palm Springs and Oregon, Portland, and Seattle, and we'd do these trips. And then the following year, we'd go back. Oh, that was a DC-4 in those days. This was in mid-40s. And then in, let's see, then a couple of years later, they put on the Convair. I don't know if you remember Convair planes. And so we went back and did them all again. And that was really marvelous. I really loved that. And then I was with the Air Force Association when that was formed by Jimmy Doolittle, and did a lot of appearances for them. And so my devotion to aviation has been long-standing. And so when my opportunities came to be involved with NASA, that was just absolutely perfect. So I opened Space Kids in Houston. I've been to 2 shuttle launches. I've had some marvelous experiences with with astronauts. I've participated in NASA promotions. We've done 2 or 3 concerts at the Kennedy Center.
So tell the folks what happened for you last October.
Well, that was just extraordinary. I had, I should preface this by saying that in 1970, on January 1st, when I was calling the Rose Parade, which I did for about 7 years in a row, I had the opportunity to interview Charles Conrad, Dick Gordon, and Alan Bean. And they had just completed the second lunar landing. Second lunar landing, and from that time on, this marvelous thing had unfolded with NASA, and so I was given the opportunity to be with them, and then last October I was given this lovely medal for exceptional public achievement, which absolutely stunned me. I was totally surprised by it, and when I got the card that they were doing it, I put it on the seat beside me as I drove that day doing my errands, and at every stop sign I'd pick it up and read it again because I couldn't believe they had selected me. I'm one of only 3 civilians to get one, and I'm the only woman, and the only woman in the entertainment field. It's the other one is a conductor, Emile Decoux, and the other one is the man who produces Big Bang Theory. But I'm the only woman, so this was just an extraordinary treat for me.
Well, through all this, you've still been acting, and you've been appearing in television series right up to the present time, right?
Oh, yes, and I have another absolute marvelous thing that's been going on for the past 3 or 4 years, which I'd love to share with you. We have there is a group of lawyers and judges in town and the man Gary Green, who is a lawyer, formed the Los Angeles Lawyers Philharmonic. We've played Disney Hall about 4 times. No, we're preparing for our 4th concert now at Disney Hall. I MC those concerts, and simply because I knew Gary from previous orchestra that he was involved in, and we have. And then as an adjunct of that, he's formed a big band called the Big Band Barristers, and it's really just amazing because we have on vibes Judge Stuart Waxman. On the piano is Arthur Gilbert, Judge Arthur Gilbert, who is the head of the Superior Court of Appeals and of the state of California. And they are all lawyers and judges, and they come in from their practice or from the courtroom and sit down and pick up their instruments and play brilliantly. And this has been such a treat because I was raised in a musical environment, and we had music around the house all the time. So to be able to have all this music and they rehearse every Monday night with the Philharmonic, and the big band rehearses every Thursday night. I've become the band chick because I was there from the first downbeat. But also, I lived in Beverly Hills with my father, and my father wrote a song called "The World is Waiting for the Sunrise." I don't know if you remember that song. It's been recorded over about 250 times. In his biography, John Lennon wrote that when he first got his first guitar as a teenager, the first song he learned to play was "The World is Waiting for the Sunrise," the Les Paul and Mary Ford version.
Oh, yeah.
But
yeah,
one
that's
other
what I
thing,
remember.
yes, the dear one, the world is waiting for the sunrise, Anyway, then I was in Mission Control in Houston in October of 1992 when "The World is Waiting for the Sunrise" was played as a wake-up tune for the astronauts on the then current shuttle mission. And I was told it was an appropriate song because there's a new sunrise in space every hour and a half as the shuttle flies around the Earth, if you can picture that.
Oh, that must have been a huge thrill.
Oh, my God, yeah. Well, I teared up. And, of course, so pretty soon the voice comes down from space, and the announcer said that I was there and that my father had written a song. And pretty soon this voice came down from space, and they said, "Mission Control, yes? Well, a few of us up here on the shuttle want to know what Lassie's mother is doing in Mission Control at 2:10 in the morning." And then the following year, then an astronaut came up to me and he said, "Hi, June. Thanks for waking me up that morning." Well, it's just the best.
So with that, I guess we'll just say thanks to June Lockhart.
Hi, this is Wes Britton, and when I say our next guest, Bill Mumy, has been part of our lives in one way or another all this time, that's because he's had an astonishingly varied career. He started out as a child actor, and among his most memorable roles back in the day would have been several episodes of The Twilight Zone, certainly as Danger, Will Robinson Danger, on the classic hit Lost in Space, and later on Bill would have other sci-fi roles, as in, Babylon 5, and one of the AI movies that came out. But he's also been a voiceover narrator for many, many series, especially for arts and entertainment. I was hearing him today in some of the biographies that he narrated, but he did a lot of voiceover work above and beyond biography. And, of course, he has a musical career that's also very varied, including being half of the comedy duo Barnes and Barnes, remembered for Fish Heads back in 1978, and a number of albums that have come out since then. And what we're talking about is music in particular, as we bring Bill Mumy on. Hello, Bill. Welcome to our little radio show.
Well, thank you, Wes. It's real good to be here.
So the folks out there know a little bit about your career. Now, as I understand it, you basically started in the show business at the age of, 5?
Yeah, I'm 5 years old. I started working on television. I broke my leg playing Zorro when I was 4 years old. And
little knowing you'd get to know Guy Williams later.
Exactly. And Zorro was like the biggest thing in my world. And I certainly wasn't alone. I wasn't the only, little kid in the mid-50s with those chalk swords.
Me too. I had my cape and sword and lunchbox.
Exactly. Yeah, I just loved that stuff. And so when I broke my leg, I was laid up for, 8-9 weeks in a cast. Couldn't be running around outside with all my friends. Grew up on a little cul-de-sac in West Los Angeles, and just about every house had a kid within a year or two of my age. It was pretty nice. But anyway, I sat there in the cast for a couple of months watching Zorro on TV, and also specifically George Reeves as Superman on The Adventures of Superman. And it really hit me in a huge way. I'm sure it may have hit other kids at the same time, but I don't know. It just hit me that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get inside the television set, and I wanted to be an adventure hero like Zorro and Superman. And I really bugged my mom and dad about making that happen. My folks were older than a lot of my friends' parents. My dad was 50 when I was born. My mom was 41. And my mom had spent about a dozen years working at 20th Century Fox Studios as a writer's assistant secretary before I was born. And her father, my grandfather, who had passed away before I was born, had been a successful agent in the 30s and 40s, mostly writers and directors, but some actors. His most famous acting client was Boris Karloff. He got Boris Karloff his gig as Frankenstein. And anyway, my family wasn't impressed or intimidated by show business. You know, they were familiar with it. And I was an only child, and I really wanted to do it, and we lived here in West L.A. by all the studios, and so my dad said to my mother, well, you know, if you're going to go with him and that's what you want to check it out, you know, you might as well check it out. He seems to be pretty passionate about it, and you can't escape your destiny, you know. It just seemed to be the right choice for me, and I got to say, I really enjoyed doing all those different shows as a little kid. I started when I was 5, and I'm still going, although there's been a few breaks in between.
What would you say was your first major break on television?
Major break?
Twilight Zone.
I had starred in a couple of Loretta Young shows before the Twilight Zones that were pretty darn good hour-long dramas with Cloris Leachman and Loretta Young and people like that. I had done a lot of stuff before the Twilight Zones, but probably those first couple of Twilight Zones were certainly, iconic roles. And they've never stopped airing, so of course the people remember that stuff.
There's Ozzie and Harriet, and I've forgotten your resume there. But
it's huge. You know, it's easier to name a 60s television show that I wasn't on than it is the ones I was. Yeah, what was very cool about that, from my perspective, was, you know, the versatility and the great people I got to work with.
I was about to say, that must have been the most fascinating education a young person could ask for.
It was truly great, and I did legitimately enjoy, you know, putting on those characters and being different kids. I mean, you know, from one week you're playing an evil mutant who can read your mind and send you to the cornfield on the Twilight Zone, and the next week you'd go over and be Ozzie Nelson's neighbor and, you know, get him in trouble with Harriet for some silly thing. But then you'd go do like a Have Gun Will Travel or some, you know, ancient Western where you're out on a horse and getting into trouble with somebody, and then you'd do an Alfred Hitchcock or you know, whatever it was. I kept switching from genre to genre and working with some of the greatest actors and directors that ever worked in the industry. So it was indeed a good education, and I would imagine I picked up some pretty good tricks from some pretty talented people there just from being around them. I had not wanted, or my agents and my family had not wanted to do a television series until Lost in Space came along. We'd been offered some shows, but, you know, it was so great to be such a versatile actor and like I said, have all these different type of roles and arenas to play in. But when Lost in Space came along, it was exactly what I had wanted in the first place, you know, to be a little superhero.
Right, I was just thinking making that connection there.
I mean, that was really what had clicked with me as a little kid sitting there, and Will Robinson was certainly that. He had, you know, not only did he have a laser gun, 10-year-old with his own laser gun, but he actually got to use it, you know, and he could program the robot, and he could fly the ship, and he was saving everybody's butt every week, and he had a couple of these cool little superhero outfits. No, I tell you, I never had a bad day on Lost in Space. I loved every minute of that project. I still love those people.
I was about to say, I got the impression that you formed some lifelong friendships there, especially with Jonathan Harris and Angela Cartwright.
All of them. We're all still really close. One big dysfunctional family of people that are left. You know, I gave the eulogy at Jonathan's funeral a few years ago, and he and his wife Gertrude and my wife Eileen and I, we really reconnected in a big way the last few years of his life, and we used to go out to dinner quite often, and Jonathan and I did a couple episodes of Buzz Lightyear for Disney together as voiceover artists, which was just great being in the studio with him and working with him again. And Angela's always been a strong relationship in my life, and we've worked together, and we're actually rewriting a fantasy novel together right now, trying to get that thing published.
Yeah, I could think of 8,000 Lost in Space questions, but I guess one would be is when that show was canceled, was that something that was a real disappointment for you, or are you ready to branch off and do other things? Of course, you were still a young person.
I had done, of course, 50, 60 things before Lost in Space, at least. But, when you're working for 4 years with the same people every day, same crew, on a project that you love, Lost in Space was filmed literally a mile from my house. I used to ride my purple Schwinn Stingray to the studio. In fact, I still have that purple Schwinn Stingray, and I used to ride it to the studio. And it was just, I can't tell you that anybody could have had a better time than I did on that show. Interestingly, when we wrapped up the 84th episode, the end of the third season, they were long seasons in those days.
That's right, yeah.
We were told we'd be back for the fourth season. We were told we had been picked up. So there was no closure on the set. We were all said, yeah, we're back. We'll be back. So take your holidays, rest up, and we'll see you in, whatever it was, 10 weeks or something. So nobody said goodbye, and we all just expected, as usual, we'd be back. And there's a lot of different stories about this, but the bottom line is Irwin Allen did not have the scripts for the fourth season ready. CBS wanted to cut the budget a little bit, and they wanted to see the arc of the season, and he didn't have the scripts ready, and they gave him a hard time, and evidently there was some nasty exchanges between CBS and Irwin Allen, and they just pulled the plug on the show. And Irwin thought, well, then I'll just go to another network, and unfortunately he wasn't successful in finding another home. So we just faded away after that third season, and yes, it was very, very disappointing. I had been on that. I was 10 years old when I was cast for the pilot, and I was 14 years old when we went off the air, and yeah, it was a big drag to be canceled because I really enjoyed that project.
Well, of course, you were still in school at the time I'm taking it, so you had all kinds of typical teenage things going on in your life, didn't you?
I imagine they were very typical, but they didn't feel typical to me, and I'm sure they don't feel typical to most any teenagers. Going back to public school was awkward. I had before Lost in Space, I had been coming in and out of school. I would be there for a couple of weeks, and I'd leave for 2 months to make a movie, and then I'd come back for a few weeks, then I'd leave for a week to do an episodic or something. But everybody that I had grown up with from kindergarten on was just used to that, so it didn't seem unusual. It was grammar school, and I was in and out, and nobody treated me like a big deal because it started that way, and it continued that way, and it was really nobody in my little world treated me like a celebrity, and I certainly never thought of myself that way. I really didn't, and my folks wouldn't have let me anyway if I tried to. But after being away from school, public school, for over 4 years, and just being schooled on the sets, going back to public school, it was the 9th grade that I went back to public school, so it was a whole different ball game, and it was a difficult acclimation process, and a lot of people wanted to be my friends because I was famous, and a lot of people wanted to kick my ass because I was famous. A lot of girls wanted to flirt with me because I was famous, and maybe a lot of girls wanted to flirt with me because I was funny. I don't know what the case may be, but the bottom line was it was difficult and it was awkward until I formed a band. And, I formed a rock and roll band in the 9th grade, and then everything was okay. Because then it was like, wow, he actually can play, and they're pretty good, and people couldn't really hate you anymore because you're up there, playing Light My Fire or some 8 Miles High by the Byrds or whatever it was, but we were up there making noise and making it reasonably well, and so people liked me for a different reason then.
What kind of instruments were you playing at the time? Over the years, you picked up quite a number of them, but what did you start with?
In terms of it was a Rickenbacker. My first electric guitar was a Rickenbacker 366 string and a Standell amp with 410s. I still have the Rickenbacker. I don't know where the amp is, but I still have that guitar. My first decent acoustic guitar was a Gibson B25 that I ended up selling to Dan Peake in America many, many years ago, and it was one of the few guitars that escaped being burnt down in a Malibu fire when his house went, but he still has that one. I tried to get it back a while ago, but he's not going to part with it. But there are a few episodes of Lost in Space where Will Robinson is out on some bad, foam rubber rock with that Gibson acoustic guitar, strumming folk songs, which was pretty funny.
Oh, so okay. Well, obviously you must have started playing long before high school then.
Oh, I started playing when I was 10. Yeah, it was folk music, the Kingston Trio specifically, that just, infected me with an uncontrollable urge to learn that catalog and learn how to play guitar and banjo. And there was something about those songs, folk songs, that really, they told a story. They had something to say. The Kingston Trio, as far as I'm concerned, especially the original trio with Dave Guard, had such a great vocal blend, and they really incorporated a lot of world music into their albums and stuff. And I don't know, man, that stuff just hit me really, really hard. And so when I was 10, that's, I got a guitar and I started taking lessons. I took lessons for about 3-4 years, and I took it very seriously. And yeah, the foundation of my, my musicianship was formed then, and I'm really glad that I did it that way.
Now, I guess professionally, was your first musical production, I guess, maybe the Barnes & Barnes material?
Oh, no. I had done a lot of stuff before Barnes & Barnes, but in terms of the first kind of thing that really struck on a national scale.
That's kind of what I meant, something that was...
Oh, yeah. But I've been out as... I was guitar player in Sean Cassidy's band when he was a big Teen Idol tour in the world with him, or the country with him anyway, like playing, sports arenas every night to scream 15,000 screaming kids. That was like being in A Hard Day's Night. I can't tell you how cool that was. And I started working with America in the early 70s, writing and playing with them. And I had an acoustic trio named Redwood that recorded and toured nonstop from 1969 through 1975. So Barnes & Barnes came along in the late 70s, and really what it was Robert Hamer, my partner in Barnes & Barnes, and we had grown up together. In fact, he was in that very first junior high school band with me. He plays keyboards. He had that cool Farfisa organ. And we used to, just jam at his house or my house. Both of us always had multi-track stereo tape recorders. As soon as we were 10 or 11, we had a tape recorder with a couple of tracks on it. And, we used to just jam the blues and silly rock and roll stuff, and because we didn't really, we weren't playing cover tunes, we were just jamming, we started making up lyrics that were, left of center, based on EC comic books or things that we saw in Zap comic books, a lot of comic book influence in the early Barnes & Barnes stuff, and continues to this day. It's really adolescent music. It just, we were adolescents when we started it, which is now we don't have that excuse. Anyway, one day we had a meal at a Chinese restaurant, and it was they brought the fish with the fish head kind of just really, really staring at you on the plate. It was a big fish head, and we came up with fish heads. Actually, I got to give credit where credit is due. Robert wrote the chorus, which is the big thing, but then I wrote all the verses, which are pretty eclectically bizarre. I took a fish head out to see a movie, didn't have to pay to get it in. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Fish Heads has been very good to us. It came out in 78, and it was on Saturday Night Live, and we had a little band with Bill Paxton and Rocky Shank, two great artists who went on to big fame in different arenas. Of course, Billy's a big movie star, and Rocky's a big high artist photographer now, but we made a lot of little videos on 16mm Bolex hand-cranked, camera, a la Buster Keaton special effects that we were big fans of from the 30s and stuff. And, Fish Heads was a big hit, a real big hit. Hell, Homer Simpson has sung it. It's been a Quiznos commercial, we've done really well with Fish Head. And that led to a record deal with Rhino Records and later on CBS Records. And we made a bunch of quirky, unique Barnes & Barnes music together, and that kept on going until, I guess the early 90s, and then we kind of just broke up. We started having children and becoming parents and doing other kind of music and stuff. And But we just now returned after an 18-year hiatus of not Barnesing, and now we're Barnesing again. We released a new album just 3 weeks ago called Op Bop a Chop, the first new album from Barnes & Barnes in 18 years. So that's available. That's out there, iTunes and CD Baby and everything. It's pretty darn good. It's pretty cool. I like it. The thing that's cool about Barnes & Barnes is it really gives me the opportunity to play that kind of heavy rock and roll and that distorted guitar kind of stuff that I don't normally do in my personal music. It's also like returning to a character. It's more like being cast in a television series, because in Barnes & Barnes, you're not representing Bill Mumy and Robert Hamer. You're representing Art and Artie Barnes, these fictional characters. So you're really free to come from some pretty bizarre places.
Let's talk a bit about your soundtrack composition, because you've written a lot of instrumental music for, TV shows and documentaries and movies. How did you get into that direction of your composition?
Well, I've always had the shingle out in terms of, songwriter for hire, and over the decades I've written a lot of music for different television shows and films and some theme songs for commercials and things like that. But very recently, I was asked to write the music for a full-length documentary film. Claudia Christian, who I spent 5 years working on a television series called Babylon 5 with, Claudia had moved to England, and she moved back to L.A. this year, and she called me up, said, "Hey, my boyfriend and I, who's an excellent photographer, we're putting together a full-length documentary on light and photography in different environments, and we got a really low budget, but, I wanted to see if you might be interested in writing the music for the film." And I had just finished a couple of projects, and I wasn't really expecting to go back into the musical arena right away, but because it was, without the format attached to it, it wasn't here's a verse, chorus, bridge kind of a thing. It was more free form and liquid. I thought, well, that'll be fun. That'll be a nice change of pace. We'll see what happens. So I went into the studio for about 2 weeks, and I have a studio in my house, so it makes it a lot easier. And after about 2 weeks, I came out with over 2 hours worth of music. I played it for them, and Claudia loved it. So I ended up taking a lot of that stuff and putting together this instrumental project called Speechless, which I like to consider it's kind of like 21st century ambient blues. To me, it's very soulful. It's not just pads and ethereal background stuff. It's pretty soulful stuff. I connected to several Les Pauls on a pretty deep level while recording this stuff, and so I liked it a lot, as did my family as I was recording it. And Carnival Sky was scheduled to come out in a few months from at this point, and I sent some of this instrumental music to the record company, Global Recording Artists, up in San Francisco. And I thought, well, maybe we could, include it as like a bonus disc for the first 500 copies or something like that, And the Carl Anderson, the record company president, he liked it so much, he said, no, let's just put it out. Let's just put them both out at the same time. We'll put out 2 records, one instrumental and, one regular, so to speak, and let's just toss it out there and see what happens. So I've been in the very fortunate position of having 2 Bill Mumy records released simultaneously.
Yeah, well, I'm going to come back to Babylon 5 and some of these other things in a bit, but since we've got Carnival Sky out there, let's talk a little bit about Carnival Sky, because that's an album that I just love. That's one of my favorite albums of the year. In fact, folks, if you want to read my review of it, you can find that at Wesley Britton's Entertainment Scrapbook.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very appreciative to hear that. That's very kind of you.
Well, I was thinking when I was writing up my review and when I was playing that CD a few times, it made me think of Bob Dylan quite a lot. Mm-hmm. Was he kind of an influence on you that you can feel particularly in Carnival Sky?
Well, I would hesitate to say that I wouldn't say that I'm copying. No,
I don't
Dylan.
mean that. I mean just kind of that flavor.
I will say that I think Dylan is the greatest songwriter around. And, I love the last 4 or 5 projects that he's released over the last almost 20 years now.
Yeah, in my review, I said it's kind of the Dylan of the more recent vintage is what you were kind of reminding me of.
Well, it's certainly a standard that I'm insecure to even try to say I would measure up to any of his type of standards. But I can say that, yes, I guess he is consciously and subconsciously, Dylan has always been a big influence on me, and I am a big fan of his work and his writing and his approach to recording. The biggest single difference with Carnival Sky for me from my past projects was it's the first time I've released a record that's just a singular voice. I've always enjoyed harmony, and I've always been in bands with a lot of harmony, and I've tried to put that on my records, whether it was me singing it myself or whether it was Jerry Beckley from America doing the harmony parts or something. I've always used a lot of harmony and a little bits of, ear candy, so to speak, in the production arrangements of my records. But Carnival Sky steps away from that, and I guess you could say that's a nod and a wink to Dylan's most recent stuff, because it is just me singing alone, no harmony, singular voice. And the approach to the recording of these tracks was a little rougher and a little rawer than my previous albums have been. Now, that's not to say that it's completely sparse. There are 3 or 4 songs that are just either a guitar and a vocal or a piano and a vocal, so that is there. But there's a lot of instruments on the tracks. There's several guitar parts and bass and keyboards and percussion, etc. But it isn't laid out in a, how can I use what's the proper word? I guess I'm going to go back to ear candy again. There's a way you can produce things, and this is underproduced in a way. It's layered and it's there, but it isn't trying to be sweet or cute in any way, shape, or form. It's a bit rawer than my other projects have been. It just came out that way. Once I started this project, I just stayed true to that path, and albums take on a life of their own. I generally end up writing and recording usually about 20 songs, and then I whittle it down to what I think are the most cohesive, or I think are the best. It's difficult to be objective when you're doing most everything yourself, but I'm pretty happy with what ended up on Carnival Sky. I find myself not cringing when I listen to it.
Like I said, I got it from Carl, and I played it one time, and I got to play this again, because for the first time in many a moon, I had an album that I had to listen to the lyrics more than once. I was going, he's got some poetic stuff happening all throughout this particular album. And I think a good example of that is one song, which is just you and a piano, and that's Long Enough to Tell. What's the story behind that particular song? Because I thought that was fascinating.
It's, this album is really a combination of observational songs and confessional songs kind of melded together. I managed to take my own personal experiences and stick them into certain characters in these songs, more so than just an I, me, mine perspective lyrically. There's a lot of crap going down in the world, and it has been for quite a long time. And on this particular record, there is a lot of melding of both of those. Live Long Enough to Tell was a song that came out very quickly, and it started out just as an observational thing. Watching my daughter is 15 years old, and
now, Bill, tell folks where they can find this album, where they can find Speechless for that matter. Are there particular websites they can go to, or find it in stores, or?
Yes, yes to both of those. I mean, if you go to BillMumy.com, on the homepage there are, links that'll just take you to where you can buy them. But you can buy them at the regular places. You can buy them at iTunes. You can buy them at CD Baby. You can buy them at Amazon.com. And I'm sure that if your record store, if there still is a record store, around anywhere, they can order them. I doubt if you walk into the record store, you're going to find a big display of Mumy music, but it's certainly available to be ordered at a store if that's how people prefer to do it. That there is a guest book at BillMumy.com where I personally kind of monitor that guest book and answer people's questions. I do have, as you said, a MySpace and a Facebook, but they are run by Glenda Kuntz, who does my fan club stuff. So she's more responsible for those two sites than I am. But they're there. Plenty of info out on the internet.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
We've been on kind of a roller coaster right here, and I'm trying to think of things that I missed and didn't want to, and I know one of them, because we got all the sci-fi fans here, would be Babylon 5. Can we devote a few minutes to your career there? I didn't realize you were on quite that long. How many years did you say you were?
5 years. We did
5 years as Ambassador Lennier.
Pardon me?
Well, as Ambassador Lennier, right?
Oh, that's me. Lennier, yes. I look like an eggplant in a dress. Babylon 5, which was created and written by Joe Straczynski, was a true visionary's project. The way that the Twilight Zone was Rod Serling's project, Babylon 5 was Joe Straczynski's project. He really wrote the whole thing himself. He had these huge 5-season arcs for his characters in place. I mean, they were malleable and things were liquid, and they changed a little bit. But he really had a huge novel that he wanted to tell in place. When the show began, which is pretty unique for a television project. And he also fought really hard to keep artistic control of it, which he was successful at. So it's a pretty well-written, well-acted project, and there's 5 seasons. It's all out there on DVD. I never personally. How do I say this? I never really acclimated to the process of physically becoming and unbecoming that character. I love science fiction, and I got the audition sides to go in and read for Joe. In fact, he had requested me, which was nice because he was a huge Twilight Zone fan, big Rod Serling fan, and he kind of wanted to bring me in for this project. So, you get the sides, and all you know is you're playing this alien guy, and I worked on it and kind of found the voice that I wanted to use for this character, and went in, and I get the job, and the next thing I know, they're trying to close a 5-season contract, and on one hand, that's great, right? But on the other hand, there's this little voice in the back of my head going, well, wait a minute, this guy's not a human. What does this guy look like? And how long am I going to be in the makeup chair? I've grown up on sci-fi projects. I know what this can be. And, of course, the agent's just going, hey, don't worry about it. We're going to close the deal. And they're just seeing dollar signs. But I actually called the producer on the phone myself while they were negotiating, and I called him personally, and I said, look, we all want to make this deal work, but I need to know what I'm getting into here. How long am I going to be in the makeup chair? And the producer says to me, about an hour. I turned to my wife. Our son was 4 years old, and she was pregnant with our daughter at the time, and I say, well, honey, he says about an hour. That can't be too bad. And she goes, well, let's, give it a shot. What the hell, get back to work. So we accept the deal, and I show up for work the first day, and to make a long story short, by the time I got out of the makeup chair, it was 4 hours and 20 minutes.
Yay.
And I'm just glued from, the back of my neck to the nape of my nose. I've got these little ears on my neck. I've got a eggplant bone thing wrapped. I mean, it's serious. I'm like going, oh my God, 4 hours and 20 minutes. This is not an hour. I was starting to freak out. But we stuck it out for 5 years, and by the end of the second season, the excellent special effects makeup team, Optic Nerve was their name, and the guy who was doing my makeup was named Greg Funk, and he got it down to 2 hours. And they figured out little ways to make it more comfortable over the process. And, he was a really interesting character to play. I did have some input into his arc, and I always appreciate the fact that I was allowed to contribute to his story, and it was a very interesting project. But at the end of the day, that's when it was really difficult, because you've been wearing this glued foam rubber to your face and your head and your neck for maybe 12, 13 hours or so. Then you got to take it off, and taking it off was much, 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 much harder than putting it on. Because when you take it off, when you put it on, you can close your eyes and kind of sit back and listen to music and just kind of zone out while they glue this stuff to your face. But when you take it off, you got to sit there with, a couple of washcloths in each of your hands covering your eyeballs while people are pouring these heinous solvents on your skin and peeling this foam rubber off your face, and it takes about an hour to get it all off. But that's when it was really, really uncomfortable, because, this stuff was serious. It's like you don't want to get this in your eye, and you don't want to, and this stuff is just playing havoc with your skin. And so I never really got used to the physical process of playing Lennier. Emotionally, I really enjoyed that. Physically, it was pretty darn tough. People ask me all the time, are you going to go back to that? Are they going to ever do another Babylon 5 project? And would you want to do that? And, I don't relish the thought of gluing foam rubber to my face again. But these are things that we did for a living, folks. Next time you watch an alien on a television show or a feature film, give that guy a little more respect, because he's going to go through hell taking that stuff off.
That seems like I read somewhere that you were really delighted to be able to be a human when you appeared on Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
Oh, that's absolutely right on the nose, correct. As I said, I love being in sci-fi projects, and having done Babylon 5 for 5 years as an alien, I was immediately called from Ira Bear, who was the executive producer, showrunner of Deep Space Nine. He called me and said, "Hey, I got a great part on Star Trek for you. Would love you to do that." And I'd always wanted to be a part of Star Trek. I had written a few comic books for Star Trek, but I had never been on, an actual Trek television or film project. And I thought, oh, this will be great. And he goes, "Yeah, I got a great part for you." And he offered me the script, and it was an alien. And I said, "Oh man, I can't do this." No, I said, I'm serious. I said, "No, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't. Thank you, but I'm going to pass." And it was a hard decision, but it was also an easy decision. He came back to me a second time a few months later with another great part, and it was another alien. And I said, "Look, dude, after 45 years or whatever it was, 40 years, I'm not going to be known as, oh yeah, Bill Mumy, he's that guy who plays aliens now." I said, "I just can't do it. I'm not going to do it." So I passed, and I thought, well, okay, that's the end of that. They were very generous and very sweet. But he came back a third time with a human part, a Starfleet engineer. His name was Kellen, and it was a great, gritty war episode, and my character gets blown up at the end and dies in Nicole DeBoer's arms. And I was so happy to play a human, and so happy to get the opportunity to be a part of the Trek universe that, that's a highlight. I really am glad I did that, and I'm so appreciative that they continued to flatter me and ask me to be a part of their project. But the punchline to this is Ira Bear, the executive producer, they didn't kill my character off until it was like the last shot that I was in. They almost shot it chronologically. And as they kill my character off and they print the take, and the director says, "Okay, that's a print, we're done with Bill, we've wrapped Bill," and Ira Bear was there, and he just goes, "Yeah! Star Trek killed Will Robinson!" And he was just giddy about it. He was just having so much fun that Trek had killed Will Robinson from Lost in Space. I thought that was so funny.
Oh, yeah, that is a good story. Well, Bill, we're, just about out of time, and there's so much we couldn't get to, like your comic book career and all of that. But we should at least go out on talking about a bit what's going on for you now and what's in the pipeline for the future. So what's the plans right now for Bill Mumy?
Of course, there's the 3 new albums, Speechless, Carnival Sky, and the Barnes & Barnes Op Pop and Chop. I've also produced and written a record for a great singer named Sarah Taylor that's out there right now. And, I'm always gigging, so I'm sure I'll either be playing some solo acoustic shows around, or I'll get the band back together, and we'll be hitting the road and making some noise pretty soon. And you never know when, you get a call from somebody, the next thing you know, you're gluing foam rubber to your head for 5 years. I don't know what's ahead for me in terms of, on-camera work, but hopefully there'll be more of that in the future as well.
Well, lots of great stories there, Bill.
Well, thank you, Wes. It's been good spending this time with you. It's been real good.
Thanks again, Bill.
My pleasure.
Hello, everyone. Wes Britton here, and our next guest, Mark Goddard. Most folks will remember Mark from being Don West in the 60s sci-fi series Lost in Space. But if you have a chance to pick up his book, To Space and Back, you'll find out there's a lot more to his story than that, both leading up to space, and back in the years that have followed since the 60s and what he's been doing. And I'm not going to tell you too much about what's in it. We'll let Mark do that, and we'll bring him on right now. Hello, Mark. Welcome.
Thank you, Wes. Thanks for having me on.
Well, let's talk about your book to start off with, since it does contain your memoir and your autobiography. What got you going? Why did you decide to write your life story?
Well, I was in California visiting my daughter, Melissa. Melissa, years ago, produced a movie called Big Girls Don't Cry, which I wrote the story for. And it was it's been on a lot on cable television. It had a short-lived life in the movies. Good cast of people, and I was out visiting Melissa, and she lives in Venice, and I was up on the roof of her house, apartment type thing, and I was telling these stories, having a glass of wine, red wine, and telling these stories to her and her friends, and they were laughing. And she said, "Dad, you should write the memoir and get these stories in there." So I came back, I thought about it, and I started putting these down. Now, it's not hard to write a memoir because it's chronological. So you start right when things started happening. You go through your early childhood, I had a lot of fun experiences there, and in high school, and then going when I was doing stock in Florida. And as I wrote it, and the reason it's short, it's not very, very long, is because I didn't want to put a lot of flowery stuff into it. Everything that's in there is directed toward something that is meaningful to me in my life, or is a good story that's funny.
And you also have a lot of entertainment anecdotes in there, and I guess they really kind of begin when you get to Hollywood because, you got in the acting bug, and then you, like you said, did some stock company work, and then you went on the West Coast, and you got work like lightning. You were in the biz pretty quick, right?
Yeah, I explained all that. I was out there, and I was there for 3 weeks. I drove out from Florida. I was out there 3 weeks, and I had a test for a television series. It would be Aaron Spelling's first series called Johnny Ringo, and I was to play a character named Cully, who was a fast draw artist. So I tell stories about that.
Before you got to Johnny Ringo, you had an episode of The Rifleman that kind of changed your career.
Yeah, right. Well, I tell that too. Yeah, The Rifleman. The Rifleman was that's quite a story.
Tell the listeners about that.
I did two Riflemen. I did 2 Riflemans, and the first Rifleman was prelude to my getting drafted in the Army and then coming back to do Ringo and so forth.
Well,
later on, I did another Rifleman called Mark's Rifle, which I had a lead in, a guest lead. The first one was just a brief part, just to see what I looked like on film, But the second one, it was a good part, and I got to know Chuck very well and Johnny Crawford. And
one thing about it that jumped out at me is doing that little short thing on Rifleman got you to change your name, right?
Yeah. Well, that's because Chuck and I were both with the same agency, which was the top agency in Hollywood at the time, called the William Morris Agency. And I was my real name is Charles, so I was known as Chuck. And so I was Chuck Goddard, and then he was Chuck Connors, and the agency that handled us both said, well, they sound too much alike, And I said, well, why doesn't he change his name? Of course, he was a big star then, and I was a smart ass. But, of course, I changed my name to Mark. I had a nephew who was just born. I said, well, I'll just name myself after my nephew, Mark.
And another thing...
That's how I got Mark.
Another thing in that episode that leaped out of me in your book was you learned not to lie about your resume, especially when it comes to riding horses.
Well, yeah, people will do things like that. I can do this, I can do that to get a part. And I said that I knew about horses, and of course, in my ranch back in Boston, that's where I learned to ride. I didn't, and that's a funny story. I think that's very, very funny when I talk about that episode, which is the rifleman and my being on that horse. That was scary, Wes. That was scary as all hell. I mean, my heart was pounding when that happened, and I swore. I said, Lord, I will never say I can do something again if I can't do it. I promise. I mean, that was really scary.
But it did lead you to get a lot of early work in Westerns with, well, you said Johnny Ringo earlier. That I don't know if a lot of folks know that before Lost in Space, you were in Johnny Ringo, and then after that, The Detective. So you had TV work before. Yeah,
and I have a chapter on Johnny Ringo, and I have a lot on The Detectives. I talk about Johnny Ringo. I have more on Johnny Ringo because of my relationship with Aaron Spelling and my first series, and I love doing the Westerns. That was really a lot of fun. And but the William Morris Agency used a little bit of film I had on the rifleman that I did, where I was scared of the horse and the whole thing was ruined, and they used that to say to show it to the people at the William Morris Agency, and they were packaging 4-Star. They kind of ran 4-Star was kind of run in a way, not run by William Morris, but William Morris Agency gave Dick Powell was 4-Star, and he was also with the William Morris Agency. So it's called a package deal, and that happened with me at 4-Star, and it also happened later in my career when I was doing Lost in Space, and I was with General Artists Corporation, who was packaging Irwin Allen's shows. Now, a packaging deal, which I don't talk about too much in the book because it gets too, but I have to tell the folks now. A packaging deal is when the agency represents, the producer, and then they put people into the show, directors, writers, actors, and then you don't have to pay 10% to the agency because they take it off the top. So you can imagine when General Artists Corporation had Irwin Allen's, Lost in Space and The Giants and the Voice at the Bottom of the Sea and Time Tunnel, just take those 4 shows and figure what it cost to make those 4 shows. William Morris took 10% of that right off the top. And that's how they made their money. That's how agencies make their money. So I didn't have to pay. So I had kind of an in to getting the part because they represented Irwin Allen, although he liked me. He thought I was right for the part. And but I've always been pretty lucky, Wes, Yeah,
back in those chapters where you talk about those early days in TV, you share some anecdotes about some famous people like Buddy Hackett and Peter Fonda and legendary football player Jim Brown. Can you share a bit of that?
Right. Well, what happened, I had, when I get to Hollywood, I met, and when I was doing The Detectives, met and married my first wife, Marcia Rogers was her name. And I spent a lot of time talking about Marcia and her family. Her father was Henry Rogers, who was the #1 public relations man in Hollywood. He represented Paul Newman and Frank Sinatra and everybody. I remember he was the first public relations firm to start handling groups like The Who and Leonard Cohen and people like that, So I was kind of in, Henry would throw parties, and I was Marcia and I were there, or we had parties at our house. We got to know a lot of people that way. And therefore, that's how I get to know Jimmy Brown. And then I would take him out to play golf. I took him and Bill Russell out to play golf, and that's the story I tell. Also, I remember at a party, Nick Adams used to come by. I love Nick. He used to come by all the time.
Oh, yes. No Rebel, for those of you who don't remember him.
And you know what happened the other day, Wes? It's funny, I teach school, as we'll talk about later, but I was in a classroom, and this kid, one of the students said, Mark, I got this picture of you that I found. I said, what picture of you and Elvis Presley? I said, me and Elvis? I didn't remember. And he had this picture came up, and it was me, Elvis Presley, and Nick Adams. And I had forgotten that I knew Elvis through Nick Adams, and I knew him, okay, fine. But I forgot I had a picture taken with him. And so I have this picture. I think I'll bring that to Huntsville, too. I think I'll bring that to that picture to Nostalgia Comp. Because I had a picture of me and Elvis and Nick. I think a few people would like to have that.
Yeah, I'd be one of them, yeah.
Yeah. I saw him out there, and I remember Jim Neighbors came to my house, and he was nice. Paul Lynde at parties, and I had these different people. I mention them, but I never mention all the people I knew or saw, just who I met, because it's ridiculous. Except early in my life, I talk about meeting Elizabeth Taylor.
Yes, I remember that story.
That's when before I really came to Hollywood. And I mentioned that because it was such a fun story to tell, and it worked right into my, as a struggling young wannabe actor, and it worked into the story. Also, when I talk about the people like Peter Fonda, it worked into the story, knowing Peter. They were fun stories, and he was my friend, But I didn't casually mention a lot of people that I met or knew along the way, whether it was, Rock Hudson, so a lot of acquaintances and stuff like that. But I never really knew them. Like I knew Peter and Jimmy and Buddy Hackett. Buddy Hackett was great to me. In a way, he saved my life, and I tell that story.
Yes, you do. Yeah.
He was wonderful to me. So I talk about celebrities when it's a meaningful way, how they came into my life in a meaningful way. And of course, the golf story is not meaningful, but it's a fun story. And I have such respect for Jimmy Brown, and Bill Russell that I wanted to include them in my book. These people I've really, really admired and looked up to, and still are fond of them. I don't get to see them now, and a lot of them I've lost. Nick Adams is no longer with us, and Jimmy Franciscus.
Yes.
And these people like that, Doug McClure, who I knew and had a relationship with as a friendship, have gone, and Buddy Hackett's gone, and that's sad. But I'm back here in Boston with my wonderful wife and my son, and teaching school with a bunch of great kids, and so we'll talk about that. But basically, I had it good out in Hollywood, and I met a lot of nice people, and I did include a lot of them, and Billy Mumy, of course, because Billy was on the show with me, and we had a lot of fun on the set.
I was about to get to Bill, because not only was he on our show last year, but he's got a show right here on KSAV that's called The Real Good Music Hour. And you're right, he's a very neat guy.
Oh, great, very talented, terrific person. And I just love him to death. He's a great kid. I call him a kid. He's older now.
Yeah, he's grown up a bit. That's
when I think of I still think of him as 10 or 12 years old on the show sometimes. But he's a terrific guy.
Well, share some Lost in Space stories for the fans, because you do have a chapter on that. One thing that comes through is you kind of felt like you and some of the guys were really supporting characters for the Robot and Will Robinson show. Well,
what happened was when Lost in Space was first considered, and it was in early writings, it was a story about a family taken from the Swiss Family Robinson comic book, and it was a family in space. So therefore, when we first did the pilot, which took about 21 days, which I tell in the book I didn't really want to do, but I did it. I'm glad now I did it, but then I didn't want to do it. And I explained the reasons for that. We did 21 days, and we did the pilot without the robot and without Jonathan Harris. And once everyone looked at it, they thought, well, it needs something, needs a villain. So they gave us Jonathan Harris and put him on ship as a villain, someone who wanted to destroy the family. So he was a bad-ass guy to begin with, Mm-hmm. And then he was on the show, and he realized that he wasn't going to be around long if he stayed a bad guy, because we just, jets him off. I'd get rid of him, jettison him. But he realized if he brought a character in that was kind of funny and had to be around, they started thinking of him in terms of comic relief.
Mm-hmm.
And ironically, Batman was on opposite us the second year. Now, the first year Jonathan was on, it was black and white. It was more serious. The show was more serious. Going into the second year, they wanted to compete with Batman, and they made it campy.
Yeah.
And, of course, if you're going to go campy, what are you going to do? You're going to use the robot and Dr. Smith and have some fun with it. And they went that way. It didn't really bother me. I mean, I could go one way or the other. I could go straight, or I could go campy. That sounds funny when I say that now. I could be straight or I could be campy. So, because when we went to the comedy type show, kind of ridiculous, I had my fun with Jonathan on the show, and I had my character, I had my stuff with him. And then on the other side, I had my stuff with Guy Williams and June Lockhart. And June called me on my birthday, Saturday. She's a sweetheart. She's never forgotten my birthday. And she sounds great. But anyway, that's June. She's a sweetheart. So I I don't talk about her much in the book or Guy. I just mention them or the characters, just Billy, because I didn't want to. I just didn't see things that were right to write about in my book concerning them. Basically,
Well, I did get the impression there were a lot of pranks on the set.
Well, there were, but that was always Billy and I. And so that's the way I went. I went with, the pranks and the robot. I went with that because that was kind of funny. And I have a sense of humor. I love telling stories.
Tell the folks about some of the pranks in case they haven't seen the book yet. What jumps to your mind about some of the silly things you and Bill did?
But the one story that people know about is one day, Billy and I used to go out to lunch a lot together with his mom and stuff like that. And one day he said, we're going out to lunch. And he said he wanted to invite Bobby May, who's the guy inside the robot. And I wasn't crazy about Bobby. I didn't want him to really come to lunch with us, This one is kind of a mean guy, I guess. I mean, mean in a funny way. I don't know. Maybe I get my sense of humor screwed up. But I said, okay, I'll go see if he's still on the set. And I told the special effects people, I said, hey, Bobby's going to come to lunch with us, so I'll let him out of the robot because he had to be unscrewed and tops had to be taken off and body parts had to be taken off, the metal parts of the robot, the exterior, so that Bobby, who was inside just in black with his black mask and everything, could climb out of the robot. So I told Stu Moody and the guy, said, I'll let him out. And he said, oh, okay. And everybody went to lunch. Well, the scene that preceded lunch was on the stage, and it was on the barren stage, and it was all, sandy and the phony rocks and everything. And I looked over, and there's the robot sitting there, with Bobby in it. And I said, oh, hell, I'll let him out later. So I took off, and I went to lunch. And then my conscience, I had one, I think. I had one then, too, I guess. And I said to Billy and his mom, we're having these nice Reuben sandwiches, and I'm saying, I got to go back to set. What are you leaving for, Mark? Well, I better go back. So I went back to the set, and there on the set, when I opened the door, nobody was there. It was just the robot sitting in the middle of the set in this desert, and smoke was coming out of the top of him, billows of smoke. And I'm thinking, oh, God, I killed the robot. Oh, Jesus, I've killed the robot. I thought, he was electrocuted or something in there. That something happened. The wires were all screwed up or something. So I ran over to the robot, and I unscrewed the sides, and I took the top off, and Bob, get his neck up, and took a breath of fresh air. He said, thanks, Mark. He was smoking a cigar. He thought they were going to let him out. And all of a sudden, the smoke of the cigar got to be too much, and he couldn't put the cigar out the way with his thing. And he said, thanks, Mark. Oh, my God, you saved me. I said, yeah, Bob, anytime. That's one of the robot stories. Got a few. But you know what? I feel bad. Now, I don't feel really bad. Well, I do feel bad that we lost Bobby, that he died. But I don't feel bad that I told these stories about him because he enjoyed them, too, He enjoyed my stories about him. He tells the stories. He had a good sense of humor.
All right. Well, after Lost in Space, you have a big chunk of your book where you talk about all these different things that happened in your life. You kind of look like you were trying to find a new direction. I didn't know that you became a soap opera star on 2 different series.
Well, I talk about those 2 series, especially One Life to Live, because there were some nice, funny things that happened on that show. On General Hospital, I didn't have a lot of things that happened that I felt were funny, or interesting enough to write about. But I did do General Hospital. But One Life to Live was more of a favorite of mine, and because it was in New York, when things happen in New York, in L.A. it was General Hospital. It was not too exciting. But in New York, when you're doing One Life to Live and you're walking up and down Broadway, and ladies, chasing you because they want to get you because you're a killer on the show, and they want to get you, I tell those stories. Kind of funny stuff, But yeah, I did One Life to Live, and I did General Hospital, and I also, before I did those 2, I don't talk about this though. I think I did The Doctors. And Alec Baldwin was on it, and I killed him. I shot him. I killed him that's when he was still killable, before he became a star. And
can't think of so many stories that folks, you'll have to get the book to read. I guess one other I think I'd like to get in before we close shop. was about you and your cowboy gear and getting some unintentional publicity with your gun. You remember that story?
Oh, God, yes. Oh, yeah. Well,
why don't you share that story with the folks?
Well, early, when I was in high school, I was arrested in Boston for stealing a wooden Indian.
Yeah,
so I tell that story.
Yeah.
So now I go back to Boston to promote Johnny Ringo, and I'm wearing my cowboy outfit, and I got my Colt 45 gun on me, right? Because I was doing a publicity thing at a CBS station, and I was doing gun tricks for the lady. It was a talk show, right? Yeah, local talk show around 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a WHDH in Boston, whatever it was, WBZ TV, and I was doing the gun tricks, and so I had my gun, and my outfit on, and so we left there with a publicist, myself, and maybe somebody else, I'm not sure, and we're crossing the street, coming out of CBS, and we're crossing the street, and there's this policeman with his white hat, cap on, directing his white gloves, directing traffic, and he sees me, and he sees the gun, and he stops the traffic, and he comes over, and he pulls me to the side on the sidewalk, and he said, "Let me see the gun." So I gave him the gun, and he arrests me for carrying a gun in Boston, because it's illegal, especially a gun.
And this is long, long before 9/11. That's what jumped out at me.
Yeah, well, anyway, this is, the year would be, 1960 probably. And they arrested me, and I have the pictures. I have the picture in the book of the policeman booking me in the station. I got my cowboy outfit on. I look really kind of silly in a cowboy outfit in a modern jail with a cop booking me, And it worked out okay. Well, people can find out how it worked out when they read the book. I won't tell you how it finishes, but I was arrested. But I got lucky again, Yeah, that was that. Yeah, I had quite a life. I had a great life. I appreciate it. That's why I wrote about it, and I'll have to share it with the fans because I know they'll get a kick out of it, especially the ones that followed me or knew me. And if they want to read a real easy memoir, this is a good one to read. I've read some of the ones that people have written, and they get into their heavy-duty relationships, or they're telling poems, or they're getting on this thing. I tell you the truth, and I hate this. I find a lot of them just talky and boring. But mine is quick, fast, and it's not boring. It's always something happening on it, with a story. And that's
one thing you don't talk about in your book is what you're doing now. So before we sign off,
well, that's true.
What are you doing now?
Well, I'll tell you what happened. I wrote the book from beginning up until 1989 when I came back to teach to finish up college. And I only talk about going back to Bridgewater State College and that coming back. My mother always wanted me to finish college, and I wanted to, change careers, get into possibly teaching. So I tell a couple of stories when I was a junior at this college, because I'd gone to Holy Cross College previous to this, and I'm at Bridgewater State now, and it was a teaching school. Wonderful, wonderful. It becomes a university today. It's Bridgewater State College when I went there, and today it's becoming Bridgewater State University. So my wife teaches there, and she's up in Boston with the mayor right now, and they're becoming a university. That's a side thing. Anyway, what I'm doing and what happened is that we came back, and I went to college, and I told my wife, because when I wrote this just last year, and I was telling my wife, I said, "Evelyn, sweetheart, I love you," and I said, my book goes right up until I met you, and since I met you, nothing's happened. So, there's nothing from '89 on, but that's not the truth. The truth is that I've been teaching since '89. I've been teaching 19 years, almost 20 years at the F.L. Chamberlain School in Middleborough, Massachusetts. It's a residential facility school for kids with behavioral problems. Wonderful kids, but going through a tough time in life, and we work with them, and they have clinicians, and they live at the school, and I have my moments with them that are difficult, but for the most part, they're good moments. They're great kids. And like I say, I love walking across that campus and hearing the kids say, "Hey, Mark," because they go to college by our first names, the teachers. And I say, "Hey," and I know I get more love and satisfaction out of this job than I ever did out of any acting I ever did. As far as immediate gratification, you don't get that as an actor. Years later, you might realize that I had a little bit of impact doing Lost in Space. Some people, when they were kids, saw it and it inspired them to become astrophysicists. Seriously. I've met an astrophysicist from Harvard who was inspired by Lost in Space, or they become pilots or whatever. But that's much later. But when you're a teacher in a campus and you can see kids making a turn, changing within a year, it gives you a lot of good feelings.
Yes, like Mark said before, you could just Google for Mark Goddard and you'll find his book right there, and you can pick it up. It's rather inexpensive, and you can get an autographed copy of it. And
personally autographed copy. They do it through PayPal, and they send me the name of the people, the address, and I get it out right away. I send it out myself, and if they want it signed in a special way, they can put that in and everything. So it's I take care of all the postage, all the handling, and everything. So I enjoy doing it. I really do. So my last thing, I just want to say good luck to all the people out there that are listening to your show, and God bless you all. And
well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. Don't forget that all past shows are archived on the Artist First Radio Network, and join us next week for another exciting episode of Flashback.